My name is Martin Matter with the Witness to War Foundation. It is March 23rd, 2015, and we are in Hiawassee, Georgia. I'm sitting with Mr. Juergen Tibcken, Juergen Tibcken, who lived in Germany during the Second World War as a civilian. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Glad to hear it. My first question is, what was your family doing in Germany when you were growing up?
Actually, my family wasn't doing very much in Germany. My father was a merchant marine, first engineer, and in the latter part of the war became captain of his own ship. But he was transporting ammunition to Murmansk, to the northern area of fighting in the early 40s. He was bringing wounded back, sometimes prisoners, and eventually lost his ship. Matter of fact, it was 2 weeks after the war ended. Was being torpedoed by the Russians and taken in captivity. As far as I remembered, he was taken prisoner and escaped to Finland. He was somewhat multilingual, and he could speak some Finnish, and he disguised himself as a Finnish fisherman. They were bringing from Finland herring and dried fish to the camps. That's what they were feeding the prisoners. So he escaped. He went through Sweden and eventually came home in 1947.
And what did your mother do?
My mother was a housekeeper, period. What did she do? She took care of us.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 3. 2 siblings, actually. One of them died in 1935, the year I was born, with an auto accident from the only car that was in town. And it happened to be a Maybach, which 20 years later I drove.
And how old were you relative to the other siblings?
I was born in 1935. My brother was born in 1937. And I had a sister who I believe was born in 1939 or 40.
So you were pretty young when the war was going on, but do you remember the school systems in Germany?
Oh yeah, very much so. I started going to school in 1942, 41 or 42 in Hamburg, until we were bombed out there in 1943 in those big air raids they had. We had the air raids started, but not in our part of the city, which was residential. They started in the harbors and Hamburg. And my mother decided that it would be good for us to move. We went to our country home, which we had outside of Hamburg. We stayed there for a few days, and when the raids got a little bit too close, we went to a town by the name of Tibcken, where my grandparents lived. And that became our permanent resident during the war. But we were bombed out. We saw the bomb raids as little kids. We saw the firestorm. We saw a lot of those things over there.
I want to get to that in a minute. I want to go back to the schools, though. What do you remember about the curriculum in 1942?
Not very much. All I know is that in 2004, I met a guy on somewhere here in North Carolina on the highway, who went to the same class, to the same school with me during that particular time, just by pure accidents. Matter of fact, I'm going to visit him in a few weeks. He's in Tennessee now. What did we learn? What was our curriculum in school? We learned how to write and to read and to count. Over there, and I was very good at that kind of stuff. I only went there 2 years. That's it. Not even 2 years. And then we got transferred over to another one. When we went to Tibcken, School became a little bit more hectic. We had much larger classes. We had a teacher who was very, very strict. We were getting beaten quite often. We got our revenge, don't worry. We stole all this fruit from the garden when we could, He was a Nazi, and we were taught very much so, to hate the Jews, to, the whole different culture over there. And so was everybody else, including my grandfather, who was a Nazi, and even an officer in the medical corps.
And what sort of reasoning was there given for the anti-Semitism, or was it just because you were so young? There
was no reason. That was a fact. Okay, we learned that. We learned to fear Jews as we fear rattlesnakes over here. Like that. They were subhuman. But as it turned out, and I only found this out very recently, maybe 20 years ago, my great-grandmother is Jewish. No. Nobody ever knew that. And we had to post our genealogy right on the front entrance of the door, and it was never mentioned in there, although we can trace ourselves back to well over 600 years.
I do want to go back a little bit and talk about the bombings that drove you out of your hometown. What sort of warnings did you get?
The sirens. They're still in my head, the sirens. And then when it was over, it was one single tone, rather than waving over there. But we heard them so often, it was unbelievable. Over there. And Hamburg was a very large city. It was a very important city in that time, too. And the bombing rates, first it was the Lancasters mostly from England. Later we had B-17s and B-24s. We learned at a very early age to even distinguish the sound, whether they were American or whether they were English.
And were they mostly during the day, or were they at night too?
The night rates were always the Lancasters, always the English. They did not like to go during the day. And their bombing was not very accurate either. But when the B-17 started, that was all daylight rates. And they came at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds at a time. But that was before that. We had a bomb dropped right in front of our apartment building. It was a blind, we call it blindgänger, a dud. Okay, but it was buried right in front of our house. We had to evacuate there until they disarmed the bomb, and then we could move back in there again. But we were sitting in the cellar, no more than 10 feet away where the bomb was actually buried in the ground. It was very nerve-wracking. And you had maybe 30 people from the apartment buildings, all women and children. The men were all at war. It was very, very nerve-wracking, as for us kids.
Were there a lot of cellars, bomb shelters in the town?
Oh yeah, every apartment building had their cellar. We even had a bomb shelter out in our country home, which was basically what you call here a root cellar, And again, when we moved to Tibcken, the same thing. That's the first thing we did, is we built ourselves one of those, although we never needed it.
What sort of shortages were there, especially in Hamburg, when you were growing up?
None. We were quite wealthy. After we got bombed, we lost everything. So then we were as poor as the next person. We became refugees, actually, legally refugees. When we moved in with our grandparents.
Tell me about the trip to Stubben and what that was like.
The trip to what?
Stubben?
Stubben. The trip to them? Mm-hmm. I don't remember that. It was by train, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
And
what else do you remember about your time in Stubben?
Everything. Stubben was a small town of about 1,500 people. That was before the war. I remember that we had very few men in town. the men we did have in town after 1943 were mostly prisoners, Polish mostly, Czechoslovakian, and some Russians. All the Russians didn't last long. They disappeared. And we were pretty much on our own. We had no supervision. We had school was, since the bomb raids are almost daily, the planes would be coming over our house daily. School was out immediately the minute the siren sounded, although they didn't bomb us. But we had another peril that was even worse than that. The fighter planes. In the beginning, it was mostly Spitfires and Mosquitoes, the British planes. When they came over, that was the range, that was their turnaround point. And in order to get back to England, they were intercepted by 109s, the message word, and they would have dogfights in the sky right above our houses. The dogfights were incredibly interesting to watch, and we did every chance we got. Although many times we were sprayed by bullets, they had to go someplace. When they were shooting up there, and eventually our town itself was raided by bombers and by fighters because we turned out to be a major rail and road intersection, where you would go from Bremen to Hamburg and to Bremerhaven, and then you had the rail line go on there at the same time. So that was bombed and strafed almost every time. And when the fighter planes returned to England, they had to get rid of the ammunition to get the extra weight, or the wing tanks later on when they did to that. So they dropped the wing tanks over us, and they strafed everything they could get, especially the trains.
Sounds like you had a lot of German troops moving through the area too.
No. We saw very, very few German troops. We saw very few men to win for that. We had a few policemen in town over there.
They weren't taking the trains through Stubben at all?
Oh yeah, on a daily basis. But Bremerhaven was 24 kilometers north, and they would come through there. And then you had the road that was going where you would find military trucks and so on going through there, occasionally. And that was bombed, and it was also strafed. And we had an AK. There was a cannon with 4 barrels, mounted at the south end of the railway station. And that AK was operated actually by kids not much older than we were, maybe 3-4 years older than we were. It was almost fixed in one direction, into the sun, because that's where the fighters were coming at noontime. Very predictably, they came out of the sun, and then he started strafing. And sometimes as kids, we would stand in the street and watch them, and the damn bullets would go over about 30, 40 feet away from us, over there. But we loved it. We had fun doing that, over there. Since we had only women, mothers and aunts and so on, and to supervisors, they were so scared they would get into the cellars and so on, and we were standing there looking. We had to repair our roof quite a few times because of bullets going through there, And we did see a few people killed because of that, from the strafing, especially in the railway station itself. We saw a locomotive blow up, some kids and some refugees being caught in the stream of the fire. I was in the Hitlerjugend at that time, and it was my duty and everybody else's duty to go to the railway station when the train came, and which was usually full of refugees, and direct them to the registrations or where they would have to go. That was one of our duties.
What else can you tell me about your time in the Hitler Youth?
Well, that we did. We actually learned how to shoot rifles, even at 10 years old. You know, mostly Mausers, and 9 years old, I should say I was. You know, the older ones, the 12 or 13-year-old ones, they learned how to work a bazooka. They couldn't hold one; it was too heavy for them, so they mounted it on hand carts. You know, and we built. Prisoners actually built what we called a tank barrier in the middle of town. You know, where we make a small opening where a truck could go through but not a tank, and then a trap beneath it and so on, which was never needed, of course, you know. But they figured that they would come, we would be ready with bazookas, you know. Never shot one, of course, you know.
Was there a lot of enthusiasm amongst the youth?
Oh yes, absolutely. We loved it. We could wear a knife, you know, in a sheath. We had a uniform. We were very proud of doing that, you know. And as long as we were in uniform, nobody touched us. We could do what we wanted to do. You know. Yeah.
What's it like growing up in a society with less male role models than you know, peacetime?
Well, we didn't know any different. You know, I mean, first of all, I don't remember anything about peacetime except that my father was not around. He was at that time in Africa. That was his route, Southeast Africa. And every once in a while he would come to the harbor in Hamburg, stay there for a night or two. We never got to see him except once. My mother went there, you know, and that was it. And then stayed there for a couple of hours, and he was gone again. You know. So he was a total stranger to us. You know. When I was 5 years old, I remember he came home, and he had a black man with him. And the black man had a barrel over his shoulder, came with him. The barrel, of course, was our staple, herring, you know. And the black man slept in the stairwell, he not in the inside, and he disappeared the next day together with my father again, you
know. Tell me about the last few months of the war in Germany.
The last few months of, well, we could hear actually the bombardments of Bremerhaven and of the ships and the Weser, which was not too far away from us either. You know, when they were strafed and bombed, you know, and it was pretty damn noisy, you know. And at the very end of the war, we could hear the artillery when they were moving in on Bremen, you know. And the one thing that I remember is it's in my mind, that I had to go to the mayor's office and report something. And I stood there, you know, Heil Hitler and all that, and they all looked at me and said, "You don't have to do that anymore." That was the day Hitler died. You know. And it was a down for us. No, I mean, everything was lost all of a sudden. We were kind of lost, you know. But we had an experience previous to that, when a train came into our station, open cattle cars, with literally thousands of prisoners in them. And they were not prisoners of war, they were civilians. A lot of Jews, I suppose. No, I don't know. All I know is they were as thin as rails. They were walked through town to a camp that I did not even know existed until 30 years, 40 years later. No, later than that, my God, I just found out about it about 5, 6 years ago. And that existed not too far from us. And we laughed at them. We shot BB guns at them. No, Actually, they didn't have BBs in it, they had potatoes in it. You know, you would stick the thing into a potato and then shoot. And that was fun, and it was encouraged. You know, the policemen, they were not available at that time over there. But my mother was very distraught by them, you know, and she took a few potatoes and started hauling them over to them, raw potatoes, and for that she got a rifle butt in the back from one of the guards, you know. So that kind of woke us up. No, we knew that something was wrong, and everything after that changed. Nobody really talked yet. No, they all kept quiet. No, we had a Polish prisoner in our backyard. It was caught in our backyard by a local policeman. He supposedly had stolen some clothing from a clothesline, and the policeman just stood him up and shot him dead. No, and we saw all that. I even know who did it. You know. He's no longer alive. His son married my sister. Yeah, he married my sister. No. And he was a Russian, a Russian Germany, but they call it white Russians now. No.
And how did it feel to finally come to terms with the end of the war?
Well, when the British, we were of course British territory. The British came. They were extremely indifferent to us. They did not permit us to do anything. We had to stay in the houses. No, and then something miraculously happened. All of a sudden we had US Army trucks for us. And with the US Army trucks, they set up headquarters in our town. Although we were very distraught, we had to leave our houses. They farmed us out to farmers in the outlying areas for housing, or in tents in the back of our house. We were able to stay during the day in my grandfather's workshop, which was probably around 3,000 square feet, full of paint, ammonia, and he was a painter. And that's where we spent our days, with a stove where we cooked on, and I don't know, with all the stuff that we had around it over there, that we even were allowed to lit a fire. You know, it was amazing. But that's how we lived, and it was in late 1945. It was very, very cold, you know, and we were always very, very cold in that. But the U.S. Army, the soldiers, they moved into our town. They moved into our houses, but they treated us different. All of a sudden, we were allowed to go to their mess, and we would get hot chocolate. We would get something to eat. We had nothing to eat, you know. I mean, they did not allow. For one thing, we had a lot of chickens. We had a lot of pigs. We were not allowed to eat the chickens, for the simple reason is the U.S. Army wanted the eggs. The soldiers were tired of those plastic eggs they were getting, you know. So they guarded the chickens, believe me, you know. And they treated us quite well. I have an affinity for languages, and I learned English extremely quickly and became a gopher at the officers' quarters. And I made lots and lots of money. Not in money, we didn't have money. The only thing you could actually get from them, they could give us chits. I don't know whether you know what that is. You could only buy stuff with them in the army over there, and they didn't permit you to do that, you know, legally in Germany. But for all the chores that I did, I only wanted two things: either a can of coffee or a carton of cigarettes, or cigarettes anywhere I could get them, you know. And that's what I did. I hauled briquettes, coal, with my hand wagon from the railway station to the officers' quarters, and for every time I did that over there, they gave me a pack of cigarettes. Well, you know what a pack of cigarettes would buy? I bought a motorcycle for a carton of cigarettes when I was 12 years old. And that motorcycle today would have been worth $300,000-$400,000 because it was a wooden one, a very old one. You know? But the farmer had no use for it, but he wanted cigarettes. You know? The officers would send me to farms with a carton of cigarettes. He said, "We need some girls." You know, and I would immediately remove 4 packs from the carton and give the rest of them to the farmer, and he would give whatever to the girls and send them into town. You know, so it was a great arrangement. I mean, I had a whole cabinet full of cigarettes up there. You know, and nobody in my family smoked. You know, except me. When I was 10 years old, I smoked.
And drink coffee too, I assume.
No, hot chocolate. No coffee. I didn't like coffee in those years.
And how about the rest of your family? Did they find work in the
Yes,
post-war Germany?
yes, because of me. In the officers' quarters, I made a deal with them that all their laundry was done by my family. So it didn't only turn out to be laundry, it also turned out to be sewing. They had the patches on the soldiers. The patches, they were crisscrossed with white yarn that became fashion over there. You know, and my mother and my 2 aunts who lived with us too, you know, they did a lot of it. You know. We would do the washing, and believe me, the washing, the way we did it, you would not even believe it. No, there was a big kettle in the backyard. And in order to get the water boiling quickly, what would we use? We would use gunpowder. The bags of gunpowder that they put into big cannons, we had tons of it laying there. We would use that, and as long as it's not confined, you can burn it, and it burns very hot and very quick. The water would boil very quickly, you know. That was amazing. I mean, even thinking about it, use gunpowder as a kid, you know, to boil water. The other thing was all the military equipment from the German army, from that particular area, or more than that particular area, because we had a lot of land, not our own, but from the town, alongside the railway tracks. And we had triple railway tracks there. They would bring trainload after trainload after trainload of military equipment, tanks, artillery, trucks, tons and tons of rifles, mountains with gas masks, those canisters, long canisters of gas masks, which were, by the way, always were filled with all kinds of stuff, goodies, like we would open them up and there was sugar in there. Sugar was a golden opportunity, you know, because you couldn't buy it, you know. Watches, and some of them were booby-trapped with explosives, of which I became a victim, and one of the soldiers that we were friends with, we would take them. When we find a watch like that, we would go and bring it to the soldier, and again trade it for cigarettes or chocolate or something like that. We had no use for the watches. But this particular watch, the soldiers started winding it up. It was a rather big one, and then exploded and almost took my finger off. And the other thing is, the soldiers were all very young. You know, they were in their 17s, 18s. They were a demolition battalion. The insignia that they had on was, first of all, the first engineering, and the other one was a circle with an S in it, one side blue, one side white. I don't know what battalion that was, or what division it was. but those were the officers, most of them. And they were all young. We got along with them very well. They were very lenient. We would go in there, and they would show us, how to got those potato smasher and hand grenades, of which we had mounds of them. Yeah, take one of those, pull it and throw it. And we had fun doing that. I mean, even a few pineapples that were laying around over there, they showed us how to do those. And one of those got me shrapnel all over my leg when I was a kid. That didn't do too much. That did not curb our enthusiasm. One day, my brother and several other kids, we were playing in the area where they had all the trucks and the tanks. And by the way, and they were so fresh out of the war yet, they still had batteries that were working. So you could get into the tank over there and operate the turret. And what we didn't know is, foolishly, that ended it all, by the way, I moved the turret around, and I pulled the lanyard on the turret and on the cannon, and a shell came out right into the truck next to the tank where my brother was playing. He didn't get hurt, But that brought the whole thing to a halt. From then on, we actually had supervision, and they had guards over there from the Army. That was a little bit too much.
What was the Reconstruction process like in Germany?
Slow. When I was 14 years old, I became an apprentice in a transportation company in Bremerhaven. I had a bicycle to work or get a train to work. The pay was very, very little. What I remember mostly from that is as a Reconstruction, we had a lot of, there were areas of Bremerhaven where there were no houses. They were all bombed out. I remember the church, that one church that was standing undamaged right in the middle of all that rubble. But what I remember most of it is when the first soldiers came back from the prison camps, I had a boss who was probably the cruelest and most vicious sergeant, and he let it out on us apprentices. I got kicked in the balls several times, and the behind all the time, and over there. You had to salute to him. You had to do like he was still in the Army, and nobody did anything about it. I was working when I was 14, 15 years old. I was working in the fish halls of Bremerhaven, which there were 27 of them, and we had about maybe 15 to 20 fish cutters coming in every day with fish from the North Sea, or from Norway, or from Denmark, or from Scotland even, and unload the fish over there. And we had to walk for customers all throughout southern Germany with slips in our hand of what kind of fish they wanted and what price they were willing to pay. And they would auction the fish up, and we would be there and buy the fish for that particular firm. That's 15 years old, that's amazing, And the nicest thing was at 9 o'clock in the morning, you would start at 6 in the morning. Nothing but ice that you would walk on, cold, cold, cold. And at 9 o'clock in the morning, there was a wagon would be coming there, and they would give out glasses of hot grog. You know what that is? Water and rum with a little sugar in it, and a piece of smoked eel this size. That was our second breakfast. That was the best thing I remember from that.
Was your education taking a backseat at the time? Were you just focusing on working?
No, actually it was not. It was very important. The company that I worked for and the city itself, they had something what you would call a trade school, trade college. and they would send us there once or twice a week. And we would actually get an education there, actually get a diploma at the end of the and a title. I mastered in transportation and tariffs, what they call tariffs here. That was my master on that.
And when did you graduate?
Well, graduate probably in 54.
So you were about 18?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what did you do once you became, I guess, a legal adult by our standards?
You were 14 when you were legal adult. I was never a child. No. I became an adult when I was 10 years old because I was taking care of the family. I was the oldest boy in the family. The skinniest too. I had tuberculosis. I had all kinds of stuff, diphtheria. You name it, we had it.
So after you got your master's, what'd you do?
We had a visit from an uncle in America. He was a cousin of my father, and I talked secretly with him. Said, "Oh, this comes preferred." Back in 1947 or 1948, in the headquarters of the U.S. Army where I was working, I actually had a uniform that my mother sought me from old Army uniforms. Not no insignia, just the clothing that we had, and wooden shoes. We didn't have any other shoes. And they had a visit there from high headquarters, a couple of generals. I don't know who it was. One of them looked suspiciously, when I look at it now, like General Bradley. And that guy, after he found out that I can speak pretty damn good English, he clapped me on the back and he said, "One day, your son, you will come to the United States." And when I was 18 and my uncle came over here, I talked secretly with him without my parents knowing that I wanted to come over there. And he agreed to be a sponsor. In 1955, I actually left. I got when I was 18 years old, I got my own visa. I went to the consulate in Hamburg, and I did everything. My parents didn't even know about it at the beginning. When I finally got the last exam, they had to come with me, and they had to sign, since I was not 21, and you had to be by U.S. Army regulation, you had to be 21. And they had to come with me, and actually sign the papers and so on. That's when they found out that I actually had plans to go to the United States. I didn't have the money for the ship yet, That was $220 to go to the United States. And my salary was somewhere around in the 200 marks a month, which was at that time less than $50, But my uncle lent me the money, sent me the ticket, and in 1955 I came over here. I did not come as a immigrant yet. I came more as a visitor, but became an immigrant after I met a woman there that I could not let go. I married her. No, that was 59 years ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And what'd you do for work once you got to the States?
I got off the ship at 10 o'clock in the morning on May 10th, 1955. My uncle picked me up, and we went to his home, which was in Brooklyn. And then he said, I have a friend of mine that I need you to see. He wants to employ you. So in the afternoon, that's where we went. And I started working at 4 o'clock that same afternoon in a delicatessen store. And I did that for 3 years, 4 years. Then became a cook at a department store. And then in 1959, I decided to opened up my own business, became a partner in a business in the state of Florida. And then eventually was part owner in three of them, three stores. You know.
So, is there any other big stories about your time growing up in Germany that you'd like to share?
There's so many of them. You have a lot of them in these papers over here, you know. There's more than. There's a time, for instance, when my grandfather and I, we had a St. Bernard who pulled a wagon with paint, and we would be traveling to the country roads, to the outlying farms, and what his specialty was of doing religious sayings and calligraphy and on beams, you know, and that's what we would do. And we traveled on the country road, and that was all of a sudden, that was the time when a fighter came out of nowhere, saw us, and started strafing us. You know, out all alone. There was nobody else there. Nobody got hurt. It never hit us, you know, over there. But we had to ditch, and we get into the ditches, and over there. It was a harrowing experience, a very scary experience. You know, it's not the only time it happened. I mean, we saw them many times when they were coming over and just shooting at the cattle in the fields, people walking, you know, over there. And sometimes they actually got somebody, you know. And with that act that was operating on the outside of the railway station, actually shut down 2 planes. You know, but they got revenge on us over there. They went, they were able to go around and hit the tops of 3 farmhouses, you know, and set them on fire. You know? They were all thatched roofs, of course, you know, which is customary over there. So that was easily done, you know. And they didn't even have to touch them. If they were burning over there, that was enough, just a flame hitting them. And that was it, you know.
Well, I guess I'll take a look at those papers later and get back to you and read some of those stories. But I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to come by and tell me your story. It's been a real honor and a pleasure, but most importantly, I'd like to thank you very much for your, I was about to say service to this country, but for telling us the tales of what it was like to be in Germany.
I serviced this country. I taught a lot of people things that they needed to know.
Education is one of the most important services.
Yes, it is.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.